Hi, my name is Tim Clark with Longshore Boats, and today I'm going to take you through a few of the features on a Yamaha engine, some do's and don'ts, and just some things you need to know about this motor from a new boater standpoint. The first thing I want to show you, we'll start at the bottom of the engine, is this down here. This is called a skeg, and a skeg does two things. Number one, it protects the propeller from any sort of impact with the bottom, but it also helps give it additional steering. Okay, it's not uncommon in shallower water areas like Charleston to see that skeg, the paint taken off the skeg. That is pretty common to see that. This is your propeller. Okay, this is what makes the boat go through the water. It's essentially just a screw that turns really fast through the water and propels the boat forward. These are very sharp, so when you're swimming around off the swim platform, you definitely want to have the engine off. That's a must, but also you want to keep away from this propeller. This open area here is where your exhaust comes out of, so when you're running the boat, your exhaust is actually exiting through this point right here. Now these propellers are actually hubbed. They have an insert in them, and if you come up here and I'll show you what that looks like, these have an insert, rubber insert. So if you were to hit the bottom really hard, this rubber insert right around here would break free so that you don't damage the engine itself or the gear case. It's meant to do that. If that were to happen, you would lose the ability to go fast. You could still get home or go back to the dock or the boat landing. And then we'd simply take this off and send it to a prop shop, and they would go ahead and press a new rubber insert in, and off you go again. Or prop shops can also fix your propeller with dings and dents as long as they're not too terribly damaged. So returning to the engine here, the other really important feature down here is these vents, and these are your intake vents for cooling the motor. So when you're traveling through the water, water's getting forced into here, and then additionally sitting right here inside is a water pump. The water pump is turning at the same RPM as the engine. So for example, if you're running at 4,000 RPM, obviously that water pump impeller is turning at the same RPM. That is pumping water up through the power head of the motor, back down, and then exhausting out. Okay? If you get into shallow water, for example, you're going to the beach or maybe doing a little exploring in places you're not too familiar with, it is not at all uncommon to stuff these full of pluff mud or grass or some sort of debris. If that were to happen, you may get an overheat alarm on your engine. We don't want you to panic when that happens. We simply want you to back out the way you came in, shut the motor off, tilt the engine up, and then make sure these vents are clean. After you make sure the vents are clean, put the motor back down, start the motor up, make sure the alarm is no longer sounding, and then we want you to get up and plane, and that way you'll blow out any mud or debris that's accumulated inside the motor out. The worst thing you can do is after you run aground is to put it back up on the lift or leave it at the dock or put it as a dry stack, however you store it. You definitely want to run it to blow that mud out. Okay? All right, the next thing is on the front of this, and you won't be able to see this on camera, but at the foot, in front of the foot here, you're going to see a little notch, a little hole, and that's a very, very, very tiny hole, and that's your Pitot Tube, P-I-T-O-T. And what happens is when you're running through the water, water enters in through that little hole, hits a pressure plate, and will register speed on your Yamaha gauge. Okay, so you may often see a discrepancy between your Yamaha speed indicator on the Yamaha gauge and maybe your GPS, and that's because if you're running against the tide or with the tide, it will affect the speed that's actually shown. GPS speed is always more accurate. Okay, next thing we want to talk about is this. This is called a trim tab zinc, and this is also known as an anode. Okay, so that is a zinc and aluminum anode, and what that is meant to do is dissipate electrical charge. When you're running this engine, you have a stainless steel propeller with an aluminum block or aluminum gear case. You create dissimilar metals, you have an electrical charge. But also if you're at a marina where there's a lot of straight voltages from other boats, or perhaps a bad electrical system, an older electrical system, there'll be a charge in the water. Well, if you don't have these zinc anodes, you'll start to get corrosion on these on your gear cases. So these sacrificial anodes will let all that charge dissipate through the metal, which is zinc and again aluminum, and that will actually sacrifice itself so you don't do any damage to the motor. You also have another zinc plate under here which has got a little grounding strap. So during our annual services we always check those to make sure that they're still in good shape, but over time you'll see those start to pit and degrade, and that's what they're meant to do. Moving further up the engine, this is for changing oil. This is actually your oil drain. Okay, most of the time we'll use the dipstick to pull oil out of the engine. Okay, up here, this is an exhaust port. So when you're running at speed, yes, you're definitely exhausting through the motor, but you'll also open a valve that will allow water to additionally discharge from the motor. Okay, that's all automatic. Over on this side, you have the indicator tube, and this will actually shoot a steady stream of water. Now, back in the olden days, that was used to tell you, it was also called a telltale, it would tell you if your engine was possibly overheating because you wouldn't be shooting water out of here. Okay? In today's world, because the systems are all alarmed, it's not unusual for this not to be discharging water so rapidly. That doesn't mean you're overheating. You could have a mud dauber in here, a little piece of debris from running aground caught up in here. It's not a big deal. What we want you to do is use a paper clip or a pipe cleaner and just to ream it out, and then it'll start squirting water again. The only time we really consider the engine overheating is if you're getting an overheat alarm. This doesn't really tell you a whole bunch anymore. Over on this side here, you have your trim button, and this allows you to trim the engine up or down. So if you're trailering or you're at the beach, we don't have to get in the boat, we can do it right from here, and I'll show you how that works. So we just push a button and the engine will trim right on up. Okay? So when we're trailering the boat, we don't really want to have the engine unsupported all the way up. It's okay for short distances, maybe to and from the boat ramp if it's relatively close. But if you're doing a long trip, say you're taking the boat to the Keys or maybe up to one of the lakes or up north, you want to use one of these. And this is a ram support. And you'll come to the port side, which is the left side of the boat or the left side of the motor, and you'll take this device and you'll slip it, and you got to trim the engine up a little bit more to get it on here. Okay, you'll go ahead and slip this right on, and then you'll just set that right back down on there. Okay, so now the engine's fully supported and you are not doing any damage or putting any stress on the components while you're trailer. These are highly recommended if you're doing a long trip. To take it off, all we're going to do is trim this engine all the way back up and then remove it a little bit more. Okay, and then back down. It's important to note that these can only be put on the port side. If you put it on the starboard side or the right side of the engine, there's some zert fittings, grease fittings that you can break. So you definitely want to just put this on the port side of the motor. These will work up to engines of 300 horsepower. So between 115 and 300 horsepower, these devices work great. There's another one that Yamaha makes for the smaller engines also. Very important to have if you're trailering the boat a lot. Okay. Next thing we want to talk about is flushing the engine. So these engines are designed to flush without running the motor. Back in the olden days, you had engine muffs. You put a hose on there, you'd put it over the intake, turn the hose on, and flush the motor out that way. That's still a great way to flush the motor, but the Yamaha engineers have come up with a much easier way to do it. On the side of the motor, and all Yamahas will have the same setup, you'll unscrew this little fitting here, and this is just simply a little hose bit. You'll take your garden hose and you'll screw it into that, and you'll turn the water on, and the engine will flush. You do not run the engine while you're using this. Okay? The engine could be in the water, it could be tilted up or tilted down, it doesn't matter, on a trailer and a lift, etc. and that's all you do. We want you to flush the engine for 15 minutes. That's what Yamaha recommends, and we obviously recommend the same. When you're finished, simply turn the hose off, unscrew from the hose bib here, and then just reattach it right here, and it just threads right in. Okay, from personal experience, you may forget to put this back on. It's not a big deal. It'll shoot water out, but the engine's not going to overheat. You have a lot of reserve capacity coming through the engine in terms of cooling, so you'll be fine on that. Okay, so I'll just put that back on. The next thing I want to show you is the cowling. So I'm not going to take this cowling off, but I just simply want you to see how to unlatch it. You'll unlatch it on the left side, and then the right side, and the front of the motor will also have one, and you'll lift the cowling off. It's actually easier to lift these cowlings off when you're inside the boat. You have a little bit more leverage. They're not heavy, but they can be awkward. We recommend that you don't undo your cowling, and in another video we'll show you the power head and go through the oil fill, and then the dipstick and oil filter, etc., and show you where all that stuff is located. Okay, but I wanted to show you this because it's really important that you understand what these components do and how to flush the engine and where the different features are. Last thing I do want to show you, and so that you can see, is these where the trim and tilt rams are. So right under the engine here, come in and see that, you'll see your trim and tilt rams. It's real important when you wash down the boat that you hose these down thoroughly. Obviously, these are susceptible to corrosion, especially if a boat is sitting in the water. But you definitely want to get the hose in here and hose this down real good, and that'll extend the life of these quite a bit. Okay? So that'll wrap it up for this series here. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, give us a call. I'm Tim Clark with Longshore Boats, 843-216-4700, or tim@longshoreboats.com.